Hello. Today is one of my favorite videos of the year. It is a full breakdown of the fantasy playoffs for the schedule. Lots of details to go over. So this will be simplified, going over it one by one in a way, at least pointing out the context that you need to know, because that's the biggest thing. I can show you all these numbers. A lot of times it doesn't mean anything if you don't know the context behind it because things change in football. So let's start here with the quarterbacks and just going week by week. So week 15, week 16, week 17 as the three playoff weeks. The average in terms of how good their matchups are, 32 being the good matchups, 1 being the bad matchups. And then also next to it, if you have a bye week, aka you're one of those top 2 teams, you don't need to play in week 15. That schedule matters less, obviously. So I'll show that too, who has the best schedules if it's just week 16 and 17. I'll have all the home and aways in here as well. And the ones that are the teams that are highlighted that like faint yellow, it just means there's potential weather there. So the dome games, the ones that are played in Tampa or LA or the warmer weather places, have it as just staying white. But if it's a slight yellow, you're maybe playing in Green Bay in week 17 or in Chicago week 16, whatever it is, there's potential of that weather being a problem there. So starting up top with Tua Tagovailoa, he is at Pittsburgh. Like I said, weather game, not the greatest for Tua. Those next 2 games, he could be a solid guy for those super flex leagues, especially in week 16 versus Cincinnati. Jared Goff, if I have the star by their team name. I have a few of them throughout this video. Just means it's a potential revenge spot if you believe in the narrative. So Jared Goff, that week 15 game, first game of that fantasy playoffs, plays in LA against the Rams, who are middle of the road against quarterbacks right now. And then his next 2 games versus Pittsburgh at home in that dome, and then at Minnesota, who he just played really well against. 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, both dome games. So all 3, whether you're not going to have to worry about it, it's all played in domes. And the matchups overall, better than average. So Goff, close at low end quarterback 1 for the fantasy playoffs, I would say. More so a really good option in Superflex. If Joe Burrow comes back, he does get Baltimore at home in week 15. We look at last year, similar type of teams as they were last year compared to maybe the average NFL team, similar builds. And last year, he had 34 points per game against Baltimore. In those 2 games, 34 points per game. Then he gets Miami after that. In Miami, so a good spot to be. They are 29th in EPA per pass attempt. The reason they're 24th right now is just because they aren't getting thrown on as much. But Cincinnati, you don't worry about that as much. One of the best matchups possible there, too. So Burrow, if he can come back healthy, and they're actually playing him at this time of year, or Joe Flacco, really good for both of those spots. Joe Flacco, revenge game in Baltimore and at home versus Baltimore in a good spot there, too. We're looking down here at Bo Nix. One of these I'm not too confident in, sadly. You see his matchups versus Green Bay, versus Jacksonville, and at Kansas City. You're thinking 1 good matchup at least, 2 really hard ones. Well, the bad news is it's kind of 3 bad matchups, in my opinion. Or at least Jacksonville, not a bad matchup, but it's not a good matchup, I would say, for Bo Nix. The reason they're 31st is because they allow a lot of rushing fantasy points to quarterbacks. Bo Nix definitely has that ability, but in terms of just that passing floor that you're looking for, Jacksonville is actually top 10 in EPA per pass. They have surprisingly, I would say, been overperforming in terms of their record, getting thrown on a lot. I wouldn't say they're what their record says they are, but that's just my personal opinion, especially against this Denver defense is the main problem. Is Bo Nix going to be having 40 passing attempts versus this Jacksonville team with the defense that he has now, really relying on him matching the rushing production of these other quarterbacks before him, and then you play at Kansas City against that passing defense, home versus Green Bay, like, I don't know. I don't really love Bo Nix in terms of the playoffs right now. And at the very bottom, Mahomes, like most of the guys that are the stars at the bottom, I would say don't worry too much about it. It's just comparing him to, say, the other star quarterbacks in fantasy football. So the Chargers are tough. Denver is tough. I think it helps a little bit that they're divisional games, I would say. Just my personal opinion on how to look at it. And then Tennessee, it's just game script dependent, which Chiefs against Tennessee, that'll probably matter. But they're really bad passing defense. It's just their 15th because of that game script. So not the greatest matches for Mahomes, but not the end of the world, I'd say. If you have the bye week, this is how it would change. One guy up top, Drake Maye, set up incredibly well, even better when you remember that the Jets don't have Sauce Gardner anymore. So that secondary, worse than even 27th, what they are right now. At Baltimore, I think sets them up really well, especially with Lamar Jackson back on the opposite side. Baltimore's been better, but I think at this matchup, Drake Maye's been matchup proof, and you give him two good matchups. I really like it. And it's kind of flipped for Brock Purdy in terms of Indianapolis. That defense is a lot better. They are healthy now, and you add Sauce Gardner in there too. So Chicago, good matchup after that. But in terms of that Week 16 game, I would have them a little lower than this would suggest, at least. And again, like we're looking down at Josh Allen, it doesn't mean to trade Josh Allen. It just maybe means I would rather have Lamar than Josh Allen, is how I'd see it. But we move to running backs next. I kind of forgot to mention those quarterbacks, but these are adjusted fantasy matchups to the schedule already. But on top of that, I am doing this by the player. So I'm not going to have, like, say, a quarterback like Jared Goff or Matthew Stafford really consider the rushing quarterback upside in that game because that really I just go off the passing because that's what matters for them. If it's Lamar or even like a Baker Mayfield or other guys that just like run a little bit, we'll include everything. But I'm not going to just include the rushing. Oh, they're the 32nd against rushing quarterbacks. That'll be good for Matthew Stafford. That doesn't really matter. And it's the same for these guys at running back like a Quinshawn Judkins, Henry, J.K. Dobbins, JCM, some of those guys that don't get receiving, one target maybe, that sort of thing. I'm not including the receiving in terms of this matchup. It's just the rushing. The other guys, like a Bucky Irving up top, it's both, which I still love him. He's broken my heart this year, and the injury is still up in the air. It's risky, but if you have that juggernaut team, I don't mind buying because I think he's an RB1 when he's playing. And this. Number one in terms of that schedule. But we look at Judkins at number 3. These are just the rushing matchups. So Buffalo, they're 17th against running backs, but on the ground specifically, those rushing fantasy points, they're actually 30th. It does depend for Judkins a lot on that game script. That's what scares me with Buffalo. I would not rank him this high in terms of his matchups. It's just how it comes out. But Chicago, a little bit better there for that game script potentially. Pittsburgh, that divisional game. So overall, I would say his matchups are still solid there for sure. A couple of the important receiving matchups, Kyren Williams and Rico Dowdle right there together. Seattle, I wouldn't say is necessarily 21st. I would predict them to be better going forward because a lot of that is in the air right now. Still a good rushing defense. Tampa Bay, very similar, which Rico Dowdle also has. So downgrade those two a little bit there. Amir and Hampton right after that. That offensive line is in shambles. So he gets Dallas in Week 16. That's key. Those other two games, I'm a little less confident in. And if we're going to the bottom, we got Swift down there. We got Cooks down there. Overall, really tough matchups. Cleveland against both of those. I will say with Cook, a lot of it is more the game script dependent. Are they winning? Does he have those opportunities for touchdowns? So I think Cleveland is a little better for Cook than most running backs, but New England's still number 1 against the ground right now in terms of those rushing fantasy points allowed to running backs. Philly, still, I would say is better than 15th. I'm surprised that they're 15th on the ground so far. So a little bit tougher for Cook. He's still okay. He's fine. He's definitely going to start for you. But in terms of those fantasy playoff matchups, a little bit worse. When we're going to the bye week specifically, Trey Benson is that guy where week 15, it's tough. After that, pretty ideal. He's got Cincinnati in the championship, Atlanta before that. I think if he comes back, he will be getting that RB1 volume just because what we've seen this year. James Conner and him were splitting early on. He had that one game where he got like 75 to 80% of the touches. And then since then, it's been a mess. No one's really been good. They haven't trusted any guy there. So I think if Trey Benson can come back, he could be that guy to actually help out in those last 2 weeks. Baltimore, another one of those were a little bit worse because of receiving. Their defense has been improving, just pointing out Josh Jacobs there, but still good overall. And Tampa Bay, like I was saying with Rico Dowdle, Tampa Bay, a lot of those points per running or points for the running back is coming through the air. So for Achane, not bad. And then he gets Cincinnati in week 16. That definitely helps too. So I really like Achane. If you had that bye weekly as Pittsburgh, which isn't horrible, but again, Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh with 2 at quarterback. I don't love it, but if you can get by that, Achane definitely really good option those last 2 weeks. Henry is a key one to point out too. He gets Cincinnati in week 15. After that, pretty horrible. New England, number 1 on the ground, and then Green Bay after that. Etienne is kind of similar too, like the Jets in week 15 without Quinnen Williams, but then after that, he gets Denver and Indianapolis. So a little bit worse for Etienne if you are having that bye week and you don't need him in week 15. Like Henry's the nightmare of that. You like want to play in week 15 if you have Derrick Henry because after that it doesn't look as good. But let's go to receivers. We see here Minnesota is at the top. The one that obviously sticks out is they play Dallas in week 1. So that is a huge advantage for them. And I know McCarthy hasn't been the greatest, and these receivers in general haven't been the greatest because of it when he's in there. But we look at Dallas. They've allowed a lot of these bad quarterbacks to have their one blow-up game on the year against the Cowboys. So I would still be pretty confident in having that matchup for those Minnesota receivers, especially just with the talent that they have. Waddle's an interesting one too. I talked a lot about this Pittsburgh game. I don't love it for Tua and this Dolphins offense going into Pittsburgh in the middle of December, but pretty good matchup for Waddle. And then it's 2 different matchups. Tampa Bay, not bad at home. Cincinnati, I would say this truly is an average matchup, surprisingly, because you'll most likely be shadowed by DJ Turner on the outside. So Waddle's an interesting one there. Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown separate a little bit here because, like I was talking about, the quarterbacks and running backs, splitting it into the rushing and receiving running backs, that sort of thing, or the passing quarterbacks and the dual threat quarterbacks. For receivers, it's by alignment. Are they playing all over the place? Are they playing strictly outside, kind of like an A.J. Brown or a George Pickens or a Ted McMillan, Nico Collins, or kind of the opposite? Are they playing the large majority in the slot? Khalil Shakir, Devontae Smith, Puka Nacua, Wando Robinson, those type of guys. So here with the Eagles receivers, Devontae Smith, 65% of his routes are out of the slot. A.J. Brown, 95% on the outside. So the big difference here is that Washington game. So I will point out, Washington a lot better on the outside this year. Well, they don't have Lattimore anymore. That passing defense has already been pretty bad, and now they lose Lattimore on top of it. So I would say actually A.J. Brown closer to Devontae Smith, both with really good schedules going forward. Flowers, he is less affected by those shadow corners because he is used in motion a lot, the play action game, in the slot some, those screens, that sort of thing. He gets away from it. But do want to point out, Cincinnati will probably be shadowed by DJ Turner. Week 16 against New England, probably shadowed by Gonzo. So that 29th matchup, I wouldn't say, reflects what the actual matchup is. Another one to point out in the slot and the outside is the Broncos. Troy Franklin, dead last. Courtland Sutton, way up here because the outside for Green Bay and Jacksonville, both way better than how they are in the slot. Jacksonville, in particular, 31st against those outside receivers, number 1 against the slot right now. So Sutton definitely set up better than Troy Franklin for the playoffs at least, although it has been trending the opposite direction, sadly. Diggs in the slot gets Buffalo. That revenge game in week 15, an interesting one to point out. That Baltimore defense is improving. So 28th, they've been a lot better than that recently, especially, but that Jets defense, kind of the opposite. He'll still play on the outside a little bit, would have gotten Sauce Gardner like 30% of the time probably. So avoiding that helps him a little bit there. Wilson is right after that, and the championship game against Gonzalez. He's going to be shadowed by him, that star corner, back healthy now. They're definitely not 29th for Garrett Wilson, so a lot worse, sadly, than this would suggest. JSN, a little bit worse too because of Indy getting healthy, especially in the slot was their weakness. They get Kenny Moore back, Jalen Jones, and then they add in Sauce Gardner. It's not the ideal there for him anymore. He's still incredible, but in terms of that fantasy playoff schedule, not as good either. Pickens, not bad. More middle of the road when you consider that Marshawn Lattimore is out. That's the reason Washington was a little bit better on the outside. So I would say he's closer to where CeeDee Lamb is right now in general. But we look down at Marv. This is what scares me. Marvin Harrison Jr. has gotten really lucky in terms of his shadows this year. He just never really played teams with those elite shadow corners or those guys that at least were playing him that way, which he's a little bit more affected by because of his play style. And then in the playoffs, he gets all 3 games. The only guy to have 3 shadows. He gets Stingley in the first week. That is horrible. Then he gets A.J. Terrell in the second week. And if you somehow make the championship with them, Cincinnati still average at best. Gets DJ Turner on the outside. They've been 10th best against those outside receivers, so still not a great spot for him. Egbuka below him, but I would still like him a lot better than Marv in terms of just the matchups alone, obviously, in terms of fantasy talent. But the matchups gets Terrell week 1, but I don't think Carolina is the worst thing in the world for Tampa Bay. And then Miami, still not the greatest passing defense, although they have been better against fantasy receivers. Part of that because of the game script. When we're looking at the bye weeks, who sticks out? That first one, if you are that bye week team, really good juggernaut team, but maybe like a deeper league, you have a second flex or dealing with some injuries, whatever it is, Dubs, Watson, some of those Green Bay receivers could be an option with how they are set up. Denver week one, it's the worst matchup in the world, so it could be easy to trade for them because then after that, they get Chicago and they get Baltimore. So set up right there. Jamo, another solid prayer shot, gets Pittsburgh, which great matchup for receivers right now, especially on those explosive plays. And then after that, Minnesota, who played really well against those last two games, two dome matchups too. So we won't have to worry about weather at all there. So that's nice. BTJ is kind of the opposite. We look down at him, and it's horrible. He gets the Jets, which is actually better because they don't have Sauce Gardner shadowing him. But then after that, if you do win week one, he gets Surtain in the second week of the fantasy playoffs, and then he gets Sauce Gardner and the Colts in that championship game. So I don't love it for Brian Thomas Jr. It's been a struggle point. Not the greatest spot after that first week. In a quick PSA, as we go to tight ends, just want to point out, like I always try to do, tight end matchups don't matter as much because there's really only 10 that make an impact in fantasy. So it's really hard to base the matchups off of what we've seen this year. A lot of it is just who's allowing a lot of touchdowns, who's allowing a lot of passing yards, that sort of stuff. More simplified. But here is how the matchups would look. Tyler Warren set up very well. So that's really nice. In terms of that first week, Mark Andrews gets Cincinnati. Love that for him. And very similar for McBride. Week 17, that championship gets the Bengals. That's beautiful, even though week 16, he does have the hardest matchup possible there against Atlanta, who is by far right now the best against tight ends. When we're looking at bye weeks, Auden, speaking of Atlanta, gets them that first week. That's horrible. But then after that, Carolina and Miami definitely eases up from there. And the reverse of that would be Dalton Kincaid. First week, set up pretty well, but then gets Cleveland, Philadelphia after that. Not the greatest for Kincaid. So just beware there. That is all I got for you today, though, guys. It's been beautiful. I love this sort of stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Leave any comments, questions. I'll try to get back to you soon on those, and enjoy the rest of your day. See ya.